Welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, where today we will have part 2 of our discussion with Very Worshipful Brother Zane McCune of Verity Lodge number 59.
Ladies and gentlemen, brethren all, welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, a casual conversation around Freemasonry. First, it's important to note that our thoughts and opinions are our own and do not reflect those of our Grand Lodge or respective craft or concordant bodies. Please connect with us and ask questions via our website at theworkingtoolspodcast.com.
Welcome to the Working Tools Podcast. We have 3/4 of all usual hosts with Worshipful Brother Jarrod Dunham from Penticton number 147 in Penticton, British Columbia. Very Worshipful Brother David Colbeth from Kings Holman number 60 in Auburn, Washington. And I'm Matt Appel, and I'm a member of Mill Creek number 243, and we meet in Montlake Terrace, Washington. And Steve, unfortunately, couldn't be here this evening with us. And we have a Steve surrogate, though. We have a Very Worshipful Brother Zane McCune, who is a member of Verity Lodge number 59 in Kent. And as I'm sure you all heard in part 1 of our interview with Zane, he is a member of Verity Lodge, like I said, which is trying to be more intentional and observant in their practice of Masonry. So one of the areas that we discussed a bunch of things last time, one of the things I don't think we really touched on is, and I'm curious to know, do you guys have a dress code? Are you have expectations of your officers and your visitors and such?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I spent a lot of time listening to your dialogue about dress, and so yes, we have a dress code for the officers in our lodge for tuxedos. It's tuxedos, white gloves. It's really formal. We don't expect that of the brothers. We tell them dark suit and tie. And again, we would never turn away a brother who was frankly in any dress, especially if it was a guest. He might not know the protocol. We've been reached out to by people that are visiting and they want to stop by. Well, we're not going to tell them go buy a suit. Just like, yeah, come to lodge. But I would say that I think about dress in the observing the craft as, again, it's that recipe item. So what is your dress? And I think of a team, a basketball team, football team, little league team. They all have the same uniform. What is that uniform for your team? Because it goes a lot into the identity of being a member of the lodge. So it's if you're a member of a lodge who does the lodge polo and slacks, okay, that's fine. That's the whole thing. It's when I think there's another lodge in our district that might be associated with railroad, and they have shirts that are like railroad conductors. David, tell me if I'm wrong on that. If you remember what I'm talking about.
Yeah, St. Andrews they don't do them as their regular uniform, but they do have for their railroad. They do a railroad degree or whatever, or on railroad night. They have those costumes, if you will. Yeah,
I was thinking of the one way up north, towards
Skycomish.
Skycomish, that's the one I was thinking of. Yeah, we've got a lodge that has a lot of brothers that are Filipino, and they wear the barong, and that's their uniform. So our lodge has said, yes, let's do tuxedos. It's not an expectation for every single person that's there. However, I'd also say that when a guy buys a brand new tuxedo, because he comes in and he's like, notice anything different? He's sort of like waiting for us, like, dude, you look really sharp. He's like, yeah, it's a new tuxedo. Might be the first tuxedo he's ever owned, and that's really cool. And maybe it's the first dark suit that he's ever owned. So that's really cool to see. But I would actually say, just taking a step back, that it's more about what's the team uniform, and how is your lodge? What's the intention behind the dress? And that is really, I think, the point to that whole chapter. At least that's my read on it.
Yeah, we tell guys you don't have to go out and buy $1,000 suit. There's lots of options out there for attire. Lots of options. I mean, I'll have to tell a story. When I joined Masonry, I had a black double-breasted suit, and I put a bow tie on and white gloves and magically shiny shoes, and it looked, you could mistakenly think it was a tux.
Yeah.
And then a couple of years later, I ended up getting a striped pant, a tuxedo pant to supplement that, and then it looked even more like a tux.
Right.
And when I went into the East, then I actually spent the money and got a tux jacket. So then I had a tux, and now that's just I wear it every meeting. I wear it almost everywhere I go, even to the other visit lodges. That's just my attire, and I get a lot of use out of it.
Yeah, we had a guy. So he's not new. He's been a member several years, but he'll be going in as junior warden next year. So he was like, I really wanted to, I went out and bought the tuxedo. So this last Friday was his first time wearing it, and he looked super sharp. A girlfriend said he looked, handsome and all that. And I've heard that, time and time again. And there is something about dressing your best. I think Jarrod talked a lot about back when you guys did this actual, chapter in the earlier a couple months ago. About dressing your best, and whether that was Sunday best or however we define that. We like the classic look, but I wouldn't hold another lodge to that same dress code. It's whatever their team uniform is.
Yeah. When you wear nice clothes, you feel better about yourself. You act differently. I say it's weird because up here, it would be odd to see a lodge not in where at least the officers aren't in tuxedos, and almost everyone up here wears a tuxedo.
Yeah. Yep.
Like it would. I can remember my first time going across the border to a lodge down there and visiting, and we showed up in our tuxedos, and everyone kind of looked at us like we were, where's the funeral? And we're like, this is how we go to.
This is how we dress. And I think you guys also spent a little time talking about like, well, I don't have time to go home and change into a tuxedo. And they go, we have, I don't know how many guys, just they've got their suitor, they have their tux, they go into the back room and change. Boom, they're in a tux. It's not that hard. It takes 5 minutes to change. So it doesn't really matter what you wear for work. If you forgot it, you're still going to come to lodge. Brothers are still going to be happy that you're there. That's not really the point. So the whole, it's again, you can really kind of go back to that. What's the intent for the dress code? The other thing we do, just for fun, I'll just mention this. I'm talking about dress, and then we'll talk a little, maybe kind of circle back on some ritual things. But on the Master Mason degree, there's a lot of brothers who are Grand Lodge officers. We've got, of course, the whole slew of officers and past Grand this and all of that in our lodge. But on a Master Mason degree, we all have said we're wearing our white apron. So the whole lodge room has white gloves, tuxedo or black suit, the white apron, and it looks, and frankly, that's how we ran that that is how we've run that for a long time. We'll probably be, let's see, I guess the dress for the second section of the third degree, I think there'll be a little more, in 2024, we'll do, we have costumes for a couple of the characters, but, that we're going to round that out in next year as well. So anyway, again, there's some, probably go back to the first comment of it's always a work in progress. There's always, your lodge astro that you can be working on. So what's the feedback look? Why are we doing this? What's the intent behind it? It's not like a one and done kind of a thing.
When you were talking about the different senses and the idea of we talked a little bit about chamber reflection and around the idea of it, but there's some things that occur in the chamber reflection, but also carry over into lodge, like the lighting, as an example. It's the lodge room is generally dark lit, and Andrew talks in the book about how it's not the brightness of the light, it's generally the opposite. It's the darkness of the light that is almost more important to cause you to focus on what's happening or where the light is. And chamber reflection does that as well. But in the lodge room, so how did you, I remember the first time, I'm sure I stole it from you, but the first time I came back to my lodge and said, oh, we're going to have our lights down. And we turned the lights down and try to get people aware, like, here, I'm stepping from the outside into the lodge room. It's a different scene, different setting. Yeah. And I know one of the past masters immediately went over to why is the lights off? I went over and turned them back on.
Yeah.
And I said, what are you doing? I went to turn them off. And not even 5 minutes later, somebody else went in to turn it back on again.
Yeah.
I guess, like you said, there's when the lodge and as a whole makes that direction, then maybe those guys won't be part of the lodge at that point. But
it was more of a conversation within, like, here's what we're doing. So these are the we refer to those as elements. So what kind of elements are we bringing into the lodge? So, and right, Andrew talks about, the five senses. So this is certainly one of those five senses, but the lighting also can kind of create, I think you alluded to this, can kind of create the mood or mode even, really. So so we all talked about it as this officer group, like, this is what we're doing. And so this is what the opening is going to look like. We're also going to have music. We're also going to have incense going. When you walk into the lodge room, it's going to smell a certain way. It's going to look a certain way. You're all dressed a certain way. And when you walk in, I don't want to say it's game time. I just want to say it's like you're put into that state of being. It's time for lodge. And so that's a distinct separation from, maybe the dining room that's a little brighter and everyone's having conversation and whatnot. But when the idea is that when you walk into the lodge room, it's not just a different time, it's also a different space. And so lighting was certainly one of those elements, as was incense and music. And music's one of those things that, having been the musician in my lodge, having been a grand musician, I know the importance of music in a Masonic setting. We don't have somebody that plays piano right now, so we have recorded music, and we have a past master who runs that, and we keep it respectful. We keep it sort of on point. Certain kind of music that would be included in a particular meeting. This isn't pop music or things like that. This is recorded nice music, but it's also music that we wouldn't have if we just had a piano either. So last Friday, we had Jeremy Yielding was giving his presentation on Mozart and the symbolism of Mozart and the magic flute. So we had Mozart, music going on as part of the lodge room dining experience, and then also in the lodge room as well. And so it was just kind of a, fun way to sort of make a, little bit of a nod to the theme of that night, based on the presentation. But you wouldn't be able to have a Mozart, piece by, you could have a piano player if they knew were really proficient, but your average pianist probably can't recite everything from Mozart. So that was actually kind of cool to have that. So I think recorded music is just fine. Was it great to have live music? Sure. But I'd take recorded music over no music, just because it's better than nothing. So.
And of course, we talk about the ritual being that one of the elements that helps us to transform from the profane to our lodge experience and to set our mind right. But all those settings, all those senses are important, of course. And one of the things that we were commenting in the blue room beforehand was my disdain's a strong word, but I went to another lodge when I first experienced it was Crucible. At Crucible, who doesn't exist anymore, interestingly.
Yeah.
And they were a very, I would say, almost more true TO. I would anyway. I wasn't ready for it, but they had a moment of silence. It wasn't true meditation, I wouldn't say. It was just a moment of silence, and they didn't give any direction or any warning or any. And so instead of being intentional, my mind immediately started racing about all these things and other things, and then I got upset. I became upset that, like, why didn't you should have led me into this so I understood what I'm supposed to be doing here. And
yeah,
might have been my own fault, but I know that you, in Verity, in your opening, you have a moment of meditation. You have somebody lead that, and it's an interesting session.
We're still trying to work that out. We all like the idea, but to kind of how to lay that into the meeting correctly.
Yeah.
But I'll just say when that finally goes, there'll be some guided meditation, which I think could be refined, let's just say.
Sure.
But then there's this moment where it's until the sound of the gavel in the east. When that's said, there's usually about a minute that goes by until the worshipful master. Now, what we do, so just to be really clear, this is done before we wrap the gavel and open.
Right.
So we haven't interjected anything into the standard work.
Right.
We're all sitting there, and this really so we have that minute, and I've really appreciated that minute. And I take time to breathe. and I focus, and I don't really worry about the next thing I'm going to do as secretary, but I try to get my head into the right headspace. And even if it's just for a minute, it's like this little breather. I think Jarrod has, commented about how busy the dinner before a lodge meeting can be, and everyone's pulled in different directions, and it's a little bit chaotic, and it is. And as secretary, it's even more chaotic. So like just to even have a bit of a breather between, the dinner and when we're all sitting down and when we actually start.
Right. And like, I like that idea because in our lodge, there's always a bunch of people milling about in the lodge room itself for 15, 20 minutes before the lodge meeting starts. And so it's kind of chaotic, and no one, more often than not, the master will rap to start the meeting, and it'll take about 2 or 3 of them before everyone starts cluing into the fact that we're trying to start.
Right.
So having that moment of reflection and meditation beforehand, I like that idea because it gets people calmed down and ready and in a mind and a mood to get to the business of the lodge.
Yep. And that's to that point, whatever your lodge room looks like before the actual meeting starts, if we can get in there ahead of time and dim all the lights down and get everything ready to go, it's hard to be it's counterintuitive to walk into a room that's a little darkened with incense and that's quiet, has some nice quiet music playing in there, and walk in and be boisterous. So we've tried to keep the lodge room like that while we're, dinner's different. That's fine. But we're trying to keep the lodge room in a certain, state prior to when people walk in. But I appreciate your point, and thank you. Dave, I think you were going to ask a question. Were you? Did you want to talk about the chamber reflection, or?
Yeah, we could certainly talk about that a little bit. He certainly feels that that's an important piece to the experience, and I've kind of waffled a little bit on whether it's before the first degree only, or all degrees, or any degrees, or I don't know. I'm still. We talk about it even in our situation, what we're trying to consider, but implementing it properly, and how will it really tie in, and is it just the first degree, or so lots of questions there.
Yeah. And I think I remember you guys having this debate just on the show about, would you have it before the third degree? Would you have it before when is the appropriate time to do that? And those are good questions to ask. Like that debate, in an office, this was an officer meeting, you'd come up with something to agree on. This is why you're doing it. And then you would enact on it in the lodge. So that's the same kind of dialogue that would happen in an officers meeting. So we put a lot of thought into the way we run the ritual for a conferral, because it's a big night, and we've always approached it that it's a night for the candidate, but it's not just for the candidate, it's also for the lodge. We have a lot of guys that are stepping up into new parts. Maybe he's conferring the degree for the very first time. We don't have the same people doing all the same parts. We're taking every conferral as an opportunity to click guys through the different seats. And that's how we build out that bench strength. So it's an opportunity for the candidate. It's an opportunity for the law. It's opportunity for, the lodge as well to have a real solid shared experience. So, we have a practice before each of the degrees. And that's because even though the lodge itself has done lots of fellowcraft degrees, that lineup has not done lots of fellowcraft degrees, and everyone is in a new part. So let's walk through it and make sure that everybody, understands what it is. We also don't hold dinner before the degrees, and I'll get to your chamber reflection, question in just a second, but we also don't have dinner before the degrees. We want the candidate to arrive and experience being on site without having any interaction with anybody. And we start our degrees an hour earlier than we would normally start our stated meeting, because we're serving dinner after. And I think you guys have talked about if we do dinner afterwards, it's so late. So the way we got over that was we just started our special meetings an hour earlier, 6:30 instead of 7:30. So the candidate arrives. The lodge is already in the lodge room, but we haven't opened yet. We're just segregated from the candidate arriving, and then he's directed back into the preparation room, where he is asked to spend time in the chamber of reflection. So we've come to that topic now. My guess is that there's maybe 5 lodges in Washington that run one. That's my guess. A true chamber of reflection. I think it's a worthwhile endeavor, because what you're really doing is you're putting the candidate in solitude for a period of time for him to reflect. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, that's actually a really good thing for him to be doing. Now, what's in that room and what you ask him to do could vary. Maybe you just have him sit in the preparation room quietly and reflect on the step that he's about to take. It's not necessarily a chamber of reflection. It's, per se, but it's a moment for him to, either read the question maybe that the lodge has asked of him. Why do you intend to take this step? Or what are you leaving behind? Or what do you hope to learn? In our law, we have some specific questions that we ask him to complete in writing in our chamber reflection, but you can almost do whatever you want as long as you put some thought and intent behind it. There's nothing wrong with asking the candidate to spend some time in solitude reflecting on the step that he's about to take, and then the degree begins. And it's a moment for him to separate the rat race and the commute down to the building and the stress from work before he officially starts the conferral process. The chamber of reflection with the skull and the symbols and everything like that, for any lodge that really wants to do that, we've coached some other lodges through that as well. But it has a lot to do with, why are those items in there? What do they represent? And there's no expectation on our part. I think this was one of the little bit of the dialogue you guys were having about chamber reflection. There's no expectation on our part that the candidate understands what's in front of him. So it's not like, oh, you go through all 3 degrees, now you understand some of the stuff, and now you get a chamber of reflection. That's not the intent behind it. He's going to get presented with lots of things. He'll uncover as he goes through at least our discussion about the first degree, what those things in there represented. But a lot of it is alchemical illusion. Like, what is, what does this tarot card of the Fool represent? What does salt, sulfur, and mercury represent? And so he's going to learn about those, not in the degree, because that's not part of our standard work, but he'll learn about it over the course of the next couple of months in just lodge discussion before he takes his fellowcraft degree.
It's a hazmat situation. That's what that is.
What's that? Yeah, right.
Salt, sulfur, and mercury. That sounds like a hazmat situation to me.
So I have a big pet peeve.
Fire away.
I'm going to bring it up because it kind of lends itself into the idea of the chamber of reflection. How do you handle a chamber of reflection if you've got multiple candidates?
Great question. They all pile in there. No, they don't.
Like, do you guys actually do multiple candidates?
We will not at the same time. No.
Yeah, like, so, that's what I mean. Like, do you do you run multiple people through the degrees?
We will run multiple people through the degrees sometimes, but everything is done individually. So it makes for a longer night. So while the first candidate, we schedule them. So the first, and we know how long the degrees take. So that's not hard. So you run the candidate into the chamber of reflection. He spends his time, or even if you don't have a chamber of reflection, a moment of solitude. You could even say more generically, a moment of solitude. Let's say that. And so he's doing that. And then the degree begins, and then he's brought into the lodge room, and then into the lodge degree at some point in time, the next candidate will arrive, and he's having his own unique experience. And the only time they ever connect is at the lecture, at the entered apprentice lecture at the end. So he'll go through his whole conferral, and then the first candidate will wait in the northeast corner. The second candidate had nothing to do with that experience right there. He then enters the lodge room. He goes through his own conferral. He then goes to the northeast corner. At that point in time, then we'll do the entered apprentice lecture. And they both are students of the lecture at that point in time, as are also some of the other EAs that come from the district to hear the lecture again. We have a great entered apprentice lecturer, Joseph Marl. He does an awesome job on the first degree lecture. So we had, I think the question came up about our day of multiple master masons. That was a little bit different. And each one of those guys had worked for months on not only their proficiency, they did their full posting lecture, they did, they had read all their books, they had done their interview, they had met with the lodge. Like, everybody was comfortable with moving that up. And we said to them, you guys have had this shared experience as sort of, for the last 6 months between your fellow craft. And they even waited a month longer so that the third one could finish his posting lecture, because the three of them really wanted to go on the same day. They didn't go at the same time. They just went on the same day. So this wasn't rushed. I think there was an assumption that this was a rushed job, but not at all. These guys were fellow crafts for more than 6 months while they were working on their posting lecture and going through all of their other catechism. We have a book that they read.
What book is that?
So that's the I have a copy of that. That's the Cloudy book, where we'll break it up into EA, FC, and Master Mason, and we just order those 3 booklets separately. And then it's not called the Masonic Development Program that he gets on Grandview. Got to go through all of that. Just quite a bit of work that they've got to do in our lodge before we're ready to move them up. But they all wanted to go the same day because these guys all petitioned at the same time. And that was their choice. And so we said, okay, the only way this is going to work in Verity is if one of you goes in the morning, one of you goes right before lunch, and then another one of you can come after lunch and do your degree. And then after all 3 of those are done, we'll do a lecture for all 3 of you, and then we'll have our agape afterwards. And so we did one all the way through. First part, second part. Took a break. We had a long break in, about a half an hour break in between. Then the second guy came and he went through his chamber of reflection. And then we did the first part and the second part, if you guys know what I'm talking about with those 2 parts. And then we had lunch for about an hour. And then we had the third guy come after lunch, and we ran through those, that whole thing. And when the whole day was done, we did one lecture at the end.
Now you see that makes sense, as opposed to the, like, up here, the stand that I've actually done. We did recently one where we had 3 guys go through at the same time.
Yeah.
And it was a word I can't use on YouTube show.
Yeah.
Cluster. You can say the first part of it.
What, the shit show?
I was one of those guys. I was one of those candidates when I went through my degrees. I went through with more than one candidate in that degree. And, we all had to take turns, like either putting our hand on the shoulder, or we all came around the altar, from different angles. And, they did what they did. But again, this was a lot of what it went into. Like, we want to create the lodge that we wish that we were joining. So how do we do that? And a lot of us are actually now to the point where, like, we didn't get to go to the chamber of reflection. It wasn't our experience. We still want to create it. And every time we set it up, we spend some time in there. But it's,
I will say in support of this too, that one of those candidates is a listener of our show. And it's a little shout out to Dustin. He is a fan of the show, listens to the show. So hi, Dustin. I assume you'll hear this one. But he came to me after hearing us comment about that, and he said no. He said, and it was before, it wasn't prompted. We said no. We wanted to do that together, and we had kind of come through as a class, and we really wanted to do that. So we could have done them different days. He said
we could have.
We wanted to. He and the other candidates wanted to do that together. So that was neat that they all wanted to do that together.
The other, we spend a lot of time in our lodge. Is probably, when we say esoteric, we probably spend a little bit of time talking a little bit about the alchemical transformation, and then kind of where we see some parallels within the Masonic ritual where that kind of sort of rears its head, and maybe so somebody that maybe might not be familiar with alchemy might not even recognize that. They might just gloss right over it. But for someone who's had some conversation about that, like, there it is right there. So from our standpoint, we reflect these alchemical illusions mostly in the chamber of reflection. And that's what they're seeing it. And that's why we decided to go from one to all three. And that's, kind of ultimately, and we had to sit down and go, okay, well, we're not just going to run the same chamber reflection on all three. What's going to change about these? And so we came up with these core elements that we have within the chamber reflection. And now, like, how are we trading those out? And what are they seeing before the fellowcraft degree? And then what do they see before the master mason degree? And again, there's no intention for them to really understand. Although by the time they're kind of hitting their fellowcraft and their master mason, they don't really understand what they're looking at, but they know some of these things, like why they're in there. And so they're starting to contemplate on that, which is cool because they talk about it in our agape after the degree, and they ask questions about that. And so it's one of those things that we'll reveal it there too. All right, thanks. So I'll just mention for all the brothers that are interested in meeting Andrew, he will be visiting Verity Lodge number 59 in Kent, Washington on March 15th at our stated meeting, which is at 7:30 p.m. Come at 6:30, enjoy our dinners, $25 a person, a fantastic meal, and meet Andrew and listen to his presentation at our stated meeting. Love to have you there.
And do you have a website, Zane? Do you need to get tickets or anything ahead of time for supper?
No, you can actually pay at the door. You can PayPal us at verity59@hotmail.com.
Okay.
And it's $25 for dinner, but you can pay at the door too if you want to.
Will it be there information on your website as well, at verity59.com?
It's probably the place to go is actually on Facebook, and find us at Verity59. We'll have that out there.
Well, I think unfortunately we're out of time again. So on behalf of Jarrod and David, in the absence Stephen and myself, thank you, Zane, for coming on the show again. We appreciate having you here. Absolutely, my pleasure. It's always fun. And we look forward to talking to you all next time on the Working Tools Podcast. Goodbye.